Traditional Christmas. What is a traditional Christmas? Well, it's interesting that the dictionary definition of the word tradition is a practice handed down from generation to generation. And that interests me because, like Chinese whispers, as things are handed down from generation to generation, they change. And we look around at our traditions at Christmas and we see the crib, the trees, the presents, the greens, the lights, the carols. However, most of these are Victorian inventions from Europe from the 19th century. Christmas trees, for example, only really became popular in the 19th century after German aristocrats started decorating fir trees in their homes. And the first Christmas card was sent in 1843 and was only made popular by Queen Victoria. And, all very modern. There's an idea that says that no one can make a tradition. It takes a century to make a tradition. So tonight, we're going to have traditional Christmas carols and readings of the story of the birth of Christ. But we're also going to hear of other Christmases and traditions that existed for other people. And I'm going to begin, I've got some props, by the way. So I'm going to begin with a 18th century prop. And I hope this doesn't set fire to the set. It won't. No, there we are. And I'm going to begin with a short passage from Charles Lamb's diary from the 18th century, celebrating Christmas at Christ's Hospital, which was a boarding school, and the children had to be at the boarding school during Christmas. Let me remember the festivities when at school over a Christmas tide in 1784, when the richest of us would club our stock to have a gaudy day, sitting round the fire, replenished to the height with logs, and the penniless, and he that could contribute nothing partook in all the mirth and in some of the substantialities of the feasting. The carol sung by night at that time of year, which when a boy I have so often laid awake from 7, the hour of going to bed, till 10, when it was sung by the older boys, and have listened to it in their rude chanting, till I have been transported to the fields of Bethlehem.
The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. For us to a child is born, for us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness. From that time on and forever, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this.
Thanks, Will. Now, that's the Old Testament tradition of light coming into the darkness. And before the time of Christ, this time of year was always one where people started to look towards the light, look towards spring from that place of darkness. Now, who can tell me when you think the first time Christmas was ever celebrated on December the 25th? Anybody, any ideas? The first time Christmas was celebrated on December the 25th was 336 AD. The Emperor Constantine decided, that's how it began, the tradition, that was the date of Christmas. And we think that he decided it because either it was the winter solstice or it was one of the Roman pagan festivals that happened at the same time, and he wanted to actually have the same festival happening at the same time as the old pagan festival. But by 336, the West started to do it on December the 25th, and the birth of Jesus was celebrated then. But interestingly enough, the Eastern Orthodox Church celebrates Christmas on January the 7th. Thank you very much. January the 7th. There are no prizes tonight, unfortunately, but January the 7th. Now, T.S. Eliot, another tradition, told the story of the birth of Jesus from the Magi. Now, I have my prop here, which is actually here, from the point of view of the Magi. And this is the poem, The Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of year for a journey, and such a journey. The ways deep, and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter, and the camels galled, sore-footed and refractory, lying down in the melted snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on the slopes, the terraces, the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting liquor and women. And the night fires going out and the lack of shelters and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly. And the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. And at the end, we preferred to travel at night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears, saying that all was folly. Then at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a watermill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on a low sky. An old white horse galloped away in a meadow. And then we came to a tavern with vine leaves on the lintel, 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. There was no information, and so we continued and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place, as you might say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again, but set down this, were we led all that way for a birth or a death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I'd seen birth, and it was bitter and hard agony for us, like death. It was like our death. We returned to our palaces, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death. No trees there, no cards, just the simple story. This is a First World War jacket that was actually worn in the First World War, and it really makes the point that Christmas comes at inconvenient times during wars and oppression and difficulty. And even as we speak, there are people in terrible situations in Aleppo. And yet, often during that time, the Christmas spirit does come through. And I think that's interesting, that whatever's going on, there's something that happens. And I'm going to read you an account now from 1914 on Christmas Eve. This is written down at Christmas Eve by a captain. And this is his story of what happened on that Christmas Eve. I've just been through one of the most extraordinary scenes imaginable. Tonight is Christmas Eve, and I came up into the trenches this evening for my tour of duty in them. Firing was going on all the time, and the enemy machine guns were at it hard, firing at us. Then at about 7 o'clock, the firing stopped. I was in my dugout reading a paper, and the mail was being dished out. It was reported that the Germans had lighted their trenches up with fir trees all along the front. We'd been calling to one another for some time, Christmas wishes and things. And I went out and they shouted, "No shooting." And then somehow the scene became a peaceful one. All our men got out of the trenches and sat on the parapet. The Germans did the same. And they talked to one another in English and broken English. I got on top of the trench and talked to a German. Then the Germans began singing Stille Nacht, Silent Night. And our men joined in, and each side clapped and cheered. Then Pope and I walked across and held a conversation with the German officer in command. One of his men introduced us properly. He asked my name and then presented me to his officer. I gave the latter permission to bury some German dead who were lying between us, and we agreed to have no shooting until 12 midnight tomorrow. We talked together. 10 or more Germans gathered around, and I was almost in their lines, just within a yard or so. Then we wished one another good night and a good night's rest and a happy Christmas, and parted with a salute, and I got back into my trench. I allowed 1 or 2 men out to meet the Germans halfway. They exchanged cigars and a smoke and talked. The officer I spoke to hoped we shall all do the same on New Year's Day, and I said, yes, if I'm here. I felt I must sit down and write the story of this Christmas Eve before I went to lie down. Of course, no precautions are being relaxed, but I think they mean to play the game. All the same, I think I should be awake all night just to be on the safe side. It's weird to think that tomorrow night we shall be hard at it again. If no one gets through this show, it'll be a Christmas time to live in one's memory. The German who sang had a really fine voice. I'm just off for a walk round the trenches to see that all is well. Good night. It's so poignant.